Hi, I'm Alameda County Supervisor Nate Miley, representing District 4, including the cities of Oakland and Pleasanton and the communities of Ashland, Cherryland, Fairview, and Castro Valley. Welcome to the Cannabis Continuing Medical Education Conference. Unfortunately, I'm unable to be with you today, but I wanted to send my personal greetings to all of you who are in attendance. As I understand, you have a robust and intense agenda today, focused on tying together the healthcare aspects of use and abuse of cannabis. I anticipate there'll be many, many more discussions now that this product is legal and there are markets for people to obtain it who are adults in a legal way. We anticipate also holding a summer cannabis summit, and I really value the fact that behavioral healthcare is putting on today's conference. This conference is important to address the critical topics of neurobiology, medicinal cannabis, cannabis misuse, and treatment issues. My office is working with SEA, which stands for the Cannabis Education, Youth, and Adult Awareness, as well as Behavioral Health, Public Health, Alameda County Office of Education, and Prevention Specialists on a campaign to deter those under 21 to steer clear of cannabis use, abuse, and misuse. I applaud the conference organizers as we negotiate and navigate together these uncharted waters. Thank you all for being here. I hope you learn from each other and share best practices. Have a great conference. Enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you back in Alameda County.
Mr. Ralph Cantor, who recently retired after 25 years as a teacher and counselor and 13 years as the coordinator for drug, alcohol, and violence prevention for Alameda County Office of Education. He has a master's degree in teaching, counseling, and school administration. He specializes and trains on the following areas: marijuana awareness and drug prevention education for practitioners, which would include teachers, counselors, community-based organization personnel, and today, us. He works with youth in schools, marijuana and drug prevention education, high school and high-risk youth, parent presentations on drug and alcohol abuse, prevention for their children and communities. He's now in private practice, working with youth, parents, and faculty doing drug and alcohol prevention work, and we welcome and thank you, Mr. Cantor, for joining us today. Now, as an educator, Mr. Cantor has told me that he much prefers to work on whiteboards and easels than he does on slide presentations. We know that maybe some people, there might be some more chairs here toward the middle. So if people on the ends are finding that they're having difficulty seeing his presentation, which is really going to be mostly on an easel or on whiteboards here in front, feel free to kind of squish in. I'll make room. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, thank you.
That can go in a pocket, and this can go in a towel.
And so now anything that I mumble to myself will be heard.
Everything that you mumble will be.
That's bad.
And take it off before you go to the mentor.
Gotcha. You guys can see over there, and I'm sorry, it's going to be a lot different than this morning. This is what it's going to be this afternoon is what I want to call science light. Okay, I'm a high school teacher, and so I'm going to give a different kind of presentation. Please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, and let's see where it will take us. The one thing that I have to say in front, I'm on the second day of prednisone, and I don't know if any of you guys have taken prednisone, but I feel a little bit crazy. You know what it is? You're going to have to put up with, I don't know what's going to come out. Another thing that I got to say is today is for the high school kids a national walkout day for the gun violence thing. What a day to do it on 4/20. Let's have the high school walk out. Okay. So my main thing that I want people to come away with is that it's different for a teenager to use marijuana than it is for an adult. It's called the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. Yay! I'm sorry, I know that so many people from public health are really against legalization and all that. I'm sorry, I wasn't. But at the same time, I thought one of the interesting statistics that was up there this morning was that in Colorado or the different places where it got legalized, adolescent use went down. Here we were so worried that it was going to go up, it's gone down, okay? And so what I want is for adults to be able to really understand in their own gut why it's different for a teenager to smoke marijuana than it is for an adult. If they really get that, then we don't have to worry so much with, you know, what's the right things to say. It's sort of like seatbelts a long time ago, where, you know, we finally got, put your seatbelt on, because that's where I want adults to be. So that an adult doesn't have to feel compromised to say, did I shut this off? To say to their child, I don't want you to smoke marijuana now, even though they're smoking marijuana now. I go up into Mendocino County, and a teacher says to me, you know, Ralph, how can I tell the kids not to smoke weed when I'm growing 10 plants in my backyard? You know, meanwhile, she's getting paid $35,000 a year as a teacher, okay? She's making a few $1,000s off of those plants. You know, if you go down to Napa, you can have a winery, and you can have people that are running the winery and not have a problem telling their 15-year-old or 16-year-old, I don't want you to drink now. I'll even teach you the business and this stuff, but I don't want you to drink now. It's clear. That's where I want people to be around marijuana in adolescence. Make sense? Okay. So, let's see where we're going. Why are we talking about it? It's entrenched. For those of you that don't know, it is so entrenched in teenage culture now, I can't tell you. People, how do we reach them? This is the place that I want to go to with this stuff. I was lucky the last 13 years before I retired, I was at the Alameda County Office of Education. And there was a guy there, a doctor. There's two great teachers for me. One is Tim Cermak, who is here this morning. The other is a guy named Rod Skager. And what he did was he developed the California Healthy Kids Survey. And that really gives you a lot of the baseline on stuff. And when he first started to do it, what he was saying was, we're doing all this drug education and DARE and this and that. We're not touching them. It's not having any effect on them. So what he got into was, how do we reach them? How do we get there? And that's what I thought Tim was doing this morning with that motivational interviewing, is how do you get there? And so that's my thing with kids. So let's see if this works. That's a good start. Don't even pick it up. Is this one going to work?
A little bit.
You guys can see this at all? Yeah? Because the other thing I do is do it on both of those at the same time. That's going to get me too crazy. I'm already crazy with it. All right. So, I'm not a doc. This is science light. This is not the way it really works. But it's helpful as models to think about the brain in a few different ways. So one way to think about the brain is how we develop over time. And the first part is this reptilian brain. That's connected with, do I have enough food to eat? Is anybody going to hurt me? This is all taken care of, staying alive. Then the next step that we evolve to is this mammalian brain, which is basically when we stopped eating our young and started to raise our young. So this is the place where feeling is, where connection is, where love is, where trust is, and then comes this prefrontal cortex, which only us and dolphins have on the planet, and I'm not sure how much dolphins use it, but we sure do. This thing is an amazing thing that we got here. This thing can blow up the world. It invented nuclear weapons. This thing invented the iPhone. This gets an enormous amount of props in our society, okay? And where I was located, the County Office of Education, because I was doing drug and violence prevention, was in curriculum and instruction. That's the spot. And in curriculum and instruction, what they're concerned about is how do we lower the achievement gap? How do we get these kids that are all, how do we raise that, lower the gap, right? So they'll go, well, let's figure out a good curriculum for them. Let's figure out a good teaching strategy. They figure out all these ways, how do we get to that prefrontal cortex and raise these test scores? Well, for the kids that are more marginalized, for the kids that grew up under some kind of trauma, they go back here very quickly. Safety is a much bigger issue for somebody that didn't grow up in a safe place. Then, if it is a safe place, then the next step is, do I belong here? I don't see people that look like me. I feel, do people care that I'm here? This is where heart is, okay? So, do I get fed? How am I taken care of? Then, they can get to the prefrontal cortex to be teaching. But I was seen as the touchy-feely guy. What is this? I'm not a touchy-feely guy. This is the way we work. I need to feel safe. It's hierarchical. I need to feel like I belong. Then I can start teaching. Does that make sense to people? Okay, so, oh man. Thank you, that's the one breathe. I also ate a little bit, that helped. So when I talk to teenagers, what I say to them is that during this time, you're trying to figure out who you are. That age from 12 to 18, you're starting to individuate. When you were a kid, you played with your friends, you did all your stuff. But once you start to become a teenager, you start to figure out who you are. Am I more of a thank you? I can't drink it. Are you more of a people person? Am I more of an art person? Am I more of a science person? And you're beginning to individuate, okay? And during this time, you got your parents telling you stuff, you got teachers telling you stuff, friends, the media. But this part, deep in here, this has something to tell you also. Only it don't speak English, it don't talk a language, it doesn't make sense, it isn't rational, it isn't even conscious, it's subconscious. But this has a lot to do with who we are also. And a lot of the connection that we want to make isn't necessarily through here, it's here. This is the place, when I'm working with kids, this is the place I'm really going for. I may use a lot of science and stuff, but I want to reach these kids. I've heard it said that this is where we elect the president, not here. This is where the triggers really get pulled. This is where the decision-making takes place. So I start to teach about it with kids, and I say, so one of the places you got in there is a place over here called the nucleus accumbens. So I want to take this nucleus accumbens and take a slice of it, lay it on a slide, and look at it under a microscope. Don't use the blue one. So, when we look at it under a microscope, a lot of you have seen this before. This is a neuron, a brain cell. This is the cell membrane, this is the nucleus. It's got these long dendrites that reach out. Here's another one. This pin is going too. Now, the whole deal in the brain is how do brain cells talk to one another? How do we think? Where is the action in the brain? How does the brain work? And in order to understand that, we go to the end of the dendrite on one brain cell, the end of the dendrite on another. They come close, but they don't touch. Like right here, or maybe right here. And I want to take that and blow that up underneath an electron microscope. Thank you, Bob. And it looks like this. How are you guys doing over there? Can you see this at all? Yeah, good. And so what happens is we get input into the brain all the time. Right now, a lot of people are listening to.
Another marker up on the wall.
Up there?
It's a red.
We get input into the brain all the time. Right now, a lot of people are really looking at me, trying to hold it together here, teaching. Somebody else might be having their lunch or doing a memo, or somebody else may be looking at me, but they're really in Bermuda right now. I don't know what. But there's something going on in everybody's brain. When it comes into a brain cell, here's the deal. The brain does basically two things. Number one, it's a chemical factory. What the brain does is cook up chemicals all day long. They're called neurotransmitters. So you get an input into the brain, and it says, okay, with that input, I think I'm going to cook up this neurotransmitter. It cooks it up, and it loads it up on this brain cell. Next thing that happens is an electric spark. And the electric spark is called the synapse. And when a synapse happens, what it does is it fires across this space whatever chemical it chose to. And when that chemical hits the receptor site on the next brain cell, we experience something. We either think something or we feel something, goes to the next and the next. Now, hey, Ralph, keep breathing in.
Oh.
Deep down inside,
You're doing great.
in this nucleus accumbens, it happens to fire off a particular chemical called dopamine. And when dopamine hits the receptor site, some really important things happen. We first get born. I love this with Tim used this one too. First, slip out of your biological mother's womb. Cut the umbilical cord, tie it up, sponge off the mucus in the blood, and then hopefully somebody picks that baby up, brings that baby to their chest, and gives that baby some milk. When that milk touches that baby's lips and inputs into that baby's brain, way down here in this nucleus accumbens that's built in through God or nature, when that milk touches that baby's lips, it fires off this drug, dopamine. And when the dopamine hits the receptor site, the baby goes, milk. Yeah, milk. That feeling of yeah, it's the mind-body connection. It's dopamine hitting the receptor site. And you get yeah. Now, we used to think that what it was about was pleasure. Somebody touches your skin nice, you eat some chocolate ice cream, it fires off some dopamine, and your brain says, yes, thank you very much. Well, it turns out it goes much deeper. Much. Dead, this doesn't say low, it says dead patterns. Now, why does that not surprise me here? This is one of the reasons why it's helpful to grow up in New York.
What kind of battery do you use?
It turns out that it goes way beyond pleasure. What this thing is that's built into this baby's brain is it says to this baby, milk important. This is important. And think about it. If the baby doesn't get milk, the baby dies. Okay? So this thing that's built in here is telling this baby, this is important. And so it turns out what dopamine really is it's the what's important filter to you. And I realize that when something is important to you, it can be really pleasurable. like watching the Warriors play basketball. A lot of people couldn't care less about it, okay? It doesn't. But for some people, that interest is firing off dopamine. You follow? And in the beginning, it's the same for everybody. Getting milk, being held, getting food, all that stuff. But when you start to individuate, look at you, thank you. This place has got it together. Not even breathing. We good?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. It turns out what this dopamine thing really is the what's important filter. It's letting you know what's important to you for this little baby. When you get to be around 12, 13, and you start to really individuate and you start to figure out who you are, this is the time when you got to figure out, well, how do I party? What does interest me? What does fire off dopamine for me? How do I take care of my stress? How do I take care of my boredom? This is the job of a teenager, is to figure out what's firing off dopamine for you. This is your navigator. I want people to go into jobs and into work that they're really interested in, that they care about. This should be their guide, not necessarily what parents and teachers and everyone, not that I'm saying that that's bad, but I want the kids to tune into where are you and what's that about. Now here's where drugs come into it. Instead of this happening, somebody says, come on, Ralph, you can do this, man. Please. Somebody says, here, thank you, Bob. You're my man. Let's see if this one works. Yes. Instead, somebody says, here, drink a little of this, or smoke a little of this, and let's see what happens, okay? Now here's where people are, what's the word? They're getting their DNA from their mother and father. They're getting their DNA from their mother and father, on and on. So when you come down here, people's brains are very different, and they're inheriting the brains of their ancestors. Okay. So for some people, they have a brain they get born with, and they look at this and they go, why would I want to do that? I never want to do that and mess around with my brain. Some people get born with a brain, and we'll just do it with weed here for a second, or with alcohol. They smoke weed and they get paranoid, so they don't smoke anymore. They drink alcohol and they get sick and throw up and they forget it. Some people get born with a brain. When they smoke weed, it does this. This person says, huh, that's pretty good. I like that. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. Somebody else gets born with a brain that when they do it, it does this. We used to say in the Bronx, but a thing. It fires off a whole bunch of dopamine. Now, this is a very interesting experience for somebody, particularly a young child, or say a 13 or 14-year-old. They smoke weed, it fires off all this dopamine. I don't care what their parents say. I don't care what their friends say. I don't care what anybody says. What their brain says is, ooh, this good. This important. This like mother's milk. And it's a medicine, and it's an herb, and it got legalized, and everybody is doing it. This good. Okay. So here's where I go with the kids around this first. And let me show you one picture. No. No. Yes. This is a conglomeration of PET scans or MRIs, functional MRIs, I think, of adolescents and adults being given different kinds of tasks, emotional solving tasks, problem solving tasks, and they track it, putting all those MRIs together. And what you can see is that the activity in the adolescent brain is not all the way up in the prefrontal cortex. We used to think that teenagers pretty much had the same brain as adults, only they just didn't have the experience. Well, it turns out biologically, they're not all the way up there. You know how you learn those stages of development, like Piaget and that, you go, well, they're still in the stage of development here. So that when they smoke this weed, they go, yeah, this is it. This is what it's about. And what I say to them is this feeling of having a whole bunch of dopamine fire off of you, in my opinion, I think is a good thing. It makes you feel alive. It's like stepping out onto a lacrosse court, or I don't know what that is, but this is a good thing. This thing here, this weed thing, I am not saying that weed is good or bad. We really got it. That's what we learned this morning. It's a whole big thing, okay? However, this is a trick. This is not the real thing. This is a trick that happens to have the power in it to fire off a bunch of dopamine in somebody's brain, and the brain says, yes, thank you very much. But it's not the real thing. It's a trick, and that's really important to understand, because during this adolescent time, to trick this navigational tool is taking them off course. It's not going to kill them. They're not going to die of an overdose. But instead of figuring out, how do I party? How do I relax? How do I take care of my boredom? Where are my interests? Instead of that, let me just fire up. All I got to do is fire up, and it's taken care of. How do I hang out with friends? Now watch this, and particularly today, in high school. Can we hang out and figure out what to do? So often in this area, you got a kid in the group that says, we don't need to figure it out. Let's just roll ourselves a fat one. That way we can all get loaded and we don't need to figure it out. Well, this is an issue during adolescent time for a number of reasons. One, I just want to say this becomes a dead-end street. And that is your brain is not used to having all this dopamine firing off. Only the drug does that. So you start to make more dopamine receptor sites. So now what happens is you start to develop what I call a party brain. It says, okay, we got all these dopamine receptor sites. Where is it? Because we're ready for it. The second thing that happens is as you pound these receptor sites, they get duller. You don't feel it as much. So you start to get a brain that wants more and feels it less. So this becomes a dead-end street after a while. All right. I love the slide. This is what I'm saying, what an adolescent brain can look like. It's supposed to be an aerial view in LA of a million little highways going in a million different directions, right? By the time they're 18, it doesn't solidify until 25, but by the time they're 18 and are walking out of high school, it transforms into this. And there's two enormous changes that have taken place in the brain. Number one, there's less highways. It's called pruning. And if you've ever seen a gardener prune a tree, they cut out big branches of the tree so the tree has a chance to really grow and take its shape. Well, here, the roads that they don't take, the roads that don't fire off any dopamine for them, that gets pruned away. They go to the bathroom, they urinate, and out goes thousands of brain cells. And it's exactly what's supposed to happen. The things that they do work become major highways. And what that's about is this. For me, growing up, I was interested in basketball. So I'd be out in front of my house, and I'd be practicing a jump shot. And with a jump shot, in the beginning, you're using your ankles, your calves, your quads, and you jump. And then once you get into the jump, you know that there's a certain spot in the jump where you don't go up any higher, but you haven't started to come down. There's a split-second pause. In that pause, you engage your forearm, your wrist, your fingertips, and you take your shot. To watch Steph Curry do it is a beautiful thing. Okay. In my brain, I went through a whole bunch of connections that were my jump shot connections. Now I go and I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. And I keep getting on this road. What begins to grow around the outside of the these electrical connections is something called myelin. And what myelin is like insulation on a wire. The more you do it, the more it insulates that wire, the better that puppy fires off. So that after a while, it gets hardwired. So the things that they don't work get pruned away. The things that they do work get hardwired in. It's a very crucial time. So, kid gets together with friends. What am I going to do? Let's figure it out. Otherwise, we'll get high. Well, that's not so easy either. You got to figure out where you're going to buy it. Then you got to figure out getting money for it. Then you buy it, and you look at it and go, how do we do this? Do you roll it up? Do you put it in a pot? So you got to get the accoutrements for it. And then after that, you got to figure out where you're going to do it. And then you do it, fires off dopamine in your brain, says, yes, thank you very much. Next time it's easier. Next time it's easier. Next time it's easier. So that after a while, this gets hardwired in. And the part that I didn't say about that synaptic space is that after a while, you need more and more of this to make it happen. Okay? And what I heard a kid say is, yeah, you don't need more. All you got to do is upgrade. So, where am I going? Myelination, dopamine, synaptic space, time for building strength. Do I want to teach about this marijuana thing this way? Well, here, this one I think is a significant one that I think is very useful, that was talked about this morning, but not entirely. And what we were saying is that dopamine is that, yeah, feeling, okay? But there's other feel-good drugs in the brain. And another feel-good drug in the brain is serotonin. Now, when serotonin hits the receptor site, you get a different experience. You get a feeling of well-being. Now, what do I mean by a feeling of well-being? I mean, I feel good about myself. I'm a good person. I do good work. I have friends in my life. I have a life, okay? I feel good about who I am. That's different than, boy, I like chocolate ice cream, okay? It's like the difference between pleasure and happiness. And I think that in this discussion with people, that's really, particularly with kids, that's really worth exploring. What do you understand is the difference between pleasure and happiness? So I want to say about that one. You all understand the potency level, yes? And the three things that have changed just in the last couple of years is, number one, that use of butane that has just knocked the socks out of the THC in the system, and the delivery system. And I want to also underline something that I mentioned when I was there, which is that there's a real connection between tobacco and marijuana. And I see the tobacco industries are just standing there waiting, you know, and they got the whole Juul thing. Do you want to know something interesting? How many people here heard of Juuls? Not bad, not bad. You know, I was up in Mendocino County in Ukiah, and I said to them, how many people have heard of Juuls? One person raised their hand. It hasn't gotten up there yet. But what's happening right now is this nicotine marijuana connection. And the truth is that nicotine makes a marijuana high better. So now you've got two delivery systems here. One where I'm going to suck in a little a dab, and then over here I'm going to suck in a little nicotine through this nicotine delivery system. And there's no smell, no fuss, no muss. The delivery system is so powerful also that we're in a whole new ballgame around this stuff. All right, that's all I want to say about it. So, what, yeah?
Alcohol also increases the availability of THC, right?
That is a really good question, because it looks like it's what the kids are calling cross-stating here. And believe it or not, up north now, the people that have the wineries, they're taking half the winery and growing weed And then there's going to be a weed and wine train. How's that? So I think that there is a thing about alcohol doing something to the weed. I don't think the tea does, but oh man, it's changing so much. So, the thing about marijuana that both Tim and Dr. Kahn were talking about is that it happens to have chemicals in it that match chemicals in the human brain. It's sort of like in China and Afghanistan, they got a poppy plant. And when the poppy plant gets ripe, you squeeze that bulb and a liquid comes out that matches something in the human brain. The liquid is opium. The human brain has an opioid site. It says, I know you opium, I do it myself, come on in. Opium comes in, changes that site, and somebody gets high on opium. Well, here's this tetrahydrocannabinol that now we're finding out is really all the endocannabinoid system is just all over the place. But you bring THC into human brain, and you wait about 5 minutes, and then you take an MRI, and what you see is, or is it a PET scan, I don't know, there's 5 areas in the brain that just light up. 3 big ones and 2 little ones. These 5 areas in the brain are cannabinoid sites. They say, we know you, THC, we do it ourselves, come on in. The THC comes into these 5 sites, changes the way they work, and somebody feels high on weed. This one fires off dopamine that we talked about. This hypothalamus here makes you hungry. This guy here, the cerebellum, slows you down, both physically and slows down a lot of the mental stuff going on. This amygdala was the one that Tim was talking about a lot, and I think there's a very deep thing going on here that I think has some spirituality stuff or whatever that is triggering. And this one here, the hippocampus. And this is the one that I want to teach about here a little bit, particularly because I'm a teacher, and this is involved in education. So this is the thinking part of the brain. So this is a subconscious part of the brain. And what this hippocampus does subconsciously is it's working with memory. So I'm going to draw a memory over here. But it's really all throughout your brain. I'm drawing it here so we can look at it. Now, the way this thing works is whatever you're working on in your prefrontal cortex, whatever you're doing, this hippocampus is going into all of your memory banks and pulling up all the knowledge you have about what you're working on here. So, let's say, for instance, what you're working on is an apple. So you pick up an apple and you go to take a bite of an apple. Before you ever bite into that apple, the hippocampus goes, hey, check it out. We're going to have an apple. Is it a red apple? Is it a green apple? Is it a yellow apple? Oh, it's a green apple. Is it a Pippin? Is it a Granny Smith? I mean, you got apple knowledge that gets pulled up before you ever take a bite out of the apple. That's why you expect it to taste like an apple. You with me on this? Okay, so now let's take it to school. We'll go to 4th grade. And in 4th grade, the teacher says, okay, class, I'm going to start teaching about percents. So I'm going to start teaching about 50%. Watch what happens in this 4th grader's brain. It goes, oh, I learned about parts of a number. I got fraction knowledge. Not only that, but this year we learned about decimals. I got a whole bunch of math knowledge that gets pulled up into this 4th grader's brain. The teacher teaches the new thing about 50%. That rattles around in the kid's brain. And if the kid gets it and goes, I got it, now I see what 50% is, the hippocampus does the second thing, which is it puts the new information into memory. So the way that we learn is we pull up from what we know, and if something new is important, it puts the new stuff into memory, and it also trashes information. So it's constantly going, that's not important, no, that's important. That's the hippocampus, okay? This gets whacked by weed. It makes it not work well. So the first thing that happens is you don't pull up of a long-term memory very well. Watch what happens if you don't pull up of a long-term memory very well. You smoke some weed. You get high. And now while you're high, you pick up an apple and you take a bite out of the apple. Only you're not pulling up all the old apple memories from before, okay? So you bite into this apple and you go, oh my goodness, I may have had 1,000 apples in my life, but you gotta taste this apple. Because this apple tastes special. It's almost like eating an apple for the first time. You listen to a piece of music you listened to 100 times before, but you listen to that piece of music when you're high, and you go, whoa, I never really noticed that trumpet there. It's a shift in consciousness. And by the way, Tim was teaching this another way that I thought was ugly, which really is like a double whammy on it. What he was saying is in the amygdala, it lowers the novelty threshold, which kids say, oh, I see, so it's easy to have a good time. You got it. So here I'm lowering the novelty threshold, so everything seems kind of interesting anyway, and now I'm knocking out memory, so that now everything's Zen mind, beginner's mind. Then, especially when I teach like at Oakland School of the Arts or SOTA in San Francisco, a kid raises his hand and says, Mr. Cantor, it makes us more creative. We can really think outside the box when we smoke weed. I say to them, you're right. You can think outside the box. You're not locked into the memory system. All sorts of thoughts can float around in your brain. And then they say, yeah, then we get into these deep conversations. And in the middle of the deep conversation, somebody goes, what was I talking about? I know something deep. I just forgot what it was. It also doesn't put stuff into memory very well either. It knocks this whole thing out. And it's one of the very interesting things about a high. But what I'll say to kids then is, how's the hippocampus after the high is over? Because we kind of use this for learning and stuff, you know what I mean? How's the hippocampus? And one of the things there's two strange things about weed that we get talked about. One of them is that marijuana, cannabis, is fat soluble. Most drugs are liquid soluble, so they go into your blood, they go up to your brain, they get you high, then your heart pumps the blood through the liver filters it out, and you pee it out. And in 24 hours, your liver has cleared out all those drugs in your system, except for weed, because weed is fat soluble, it dissolves in fat. It's one of the reasons, by the way, why it's so easy for kids to make it edible. You get butter, which is pure fat, and then you get a bud, marijuana, you take the two, you put them in a pan, and you turn the heat up. The heat releases the THC, it goes into the butter, then you take the butter and you put it into a cookie or brownie, and now you got yourself an edible, okay? Whether you smoke it, eat it, or whatever, it dissolves in the fatty tissue in the body. And the fatty tissue in the body is not your butt or your thigh as much as it is brain cells. Remember he was saying that the fat, that's what the brain uses for fuel. So it sits here. That's why people don't feel a hangover. That's why you don't go through withdrawal right away. It's still there. And for the most part, and I'm going to throw out the way I understand it, for the most part, it's about 3 days. And like if a kid is on probation, and they got to go to the probation officer, and the probation officer hands him a cup, and you got to pee in the cup, and they test the pee. Well, the kids know for the most part, if I do everything other than weed, 24 hours, I'm coming up with a clean urine analysis test. If I do it with weed, I got to wait 3 days. However, if you smoke weed more than every 3 days, then before that goes out of your system, you put more in. And then before that goes out of your system, and you keep doing that for a month or two, then you're not going to come up with a clean UA for 30 to 45 to 60 days. It's not going to kill you, but hello, this is what school is about here. It is, and I want to say it real clearly, marijuana interferes with learning. It may feel like the mind is expanding, but it doesn't integrate. It doesn't put it back in. So this is a really important concern that I have for teachers, is the effect that it has on the hippocampus. Well, where else am I going here? How am I doing on time? What time you got here?
You have about 40 minutes.
40 more minutes? This prednisone stuff is wild. It compresses time. Right. Oh, it's funny. Hippocampus. And I do want to say a thing about this cerebellum and slowing down and the two docs said it in different ways. I want to say it in another way, which is that there's always what I want to call the pharmacological insult, which is that what you wanted from the drug, afterwards you get the opposite from. so that if it helped me with my ADD, because it hit this cerebellum and slowed things down, once it wears off, I got more ADD than I was before. So now I got to go do more of it on it. There's always that, here it relieved my depression for a while, but now when I come down off of it, I'm worse off than I was before. So there's always that bounce back effect here.
Got a hand. Ralph?
Question.
Oh, great.
So, because we're talking about education, so I'm at a school, so I won't say which district, I won't say which school. I'm at several districts. And right now, we're towards the end of the semester. You have kids who are short of a lot of credits.
Yeah.
And we know why, because it's related to their substance use and or other mental health issues. And so the question is, what is it in the time that's left of the semester are we going to teach? And where are we going to, how are we going to approach it? And so you already talked about, you know, what I would call dolphin brain, monkey brain, and lizard brain.
Yeah.
Where is that school going to need to reach them, and what is it that they're going to teach them?
Yes.
Because they're not going to catch up.
Right.
That's a given. But what is it they're going to do in the next month or two to cover and get them into the next semester?
Boy, you've got the question of the day. I'll tell you, there's somebody in here, Rich, who is he around or is he gone now? He is part of a committee that we're working with at Stanford that's putting out what's called a tobacco, well, they already did one called a tobacco toolkit. And it's lessons for teachers that they can just go online and take those lessons and teach tobacco. Well, now we're working on a marijuana toolkit, and they're really putting together a lot of lesson plans that then the teacher can just take and put up there. Actually, they're going to be taping me doing a lesson on this too, that the teacher can just show over there. But right now, I see adults like deers in the headlights. Deers in the headlights right now with this marijuana thing. And part of it is, and I'll let you go on, is that the marijuana teaching is much more nuanced than tobacco or sex education. You know, with marijuana, it's a different kind of teaching, and so it's more. I think it's a more sophisticated kind of drug education that requires other skills that are there.
And what I was going to say is, what then is the skill set that they're going to be teaching the students around learning? Because their learning capacity around memory has been affected.
Yes.
And so I think that's where the connection isn't happening. Is the administration is trying to figure out what is it we're going to teach them in regards to their...
And it's a different kind of drug education. What helps me is to be able to say, you bite into the apple, but you're not picking up old apple memories, so the apple tastes like it's the first time you ate it. And how's your hippocampus at it? You know what I mean? It's not a matter, in some ways it was what Tim was talking about this morning also. You got to acknowledge what they're getting from the drug. And this is also happening. That's a more nuanced way of teaching than this is bad. You know, you got to use a condom. Cigarettes are going to cause cancer. You can't come at the marijuana thing the same way.
And there's some neuroscience that's not, I would necessarily say, part of the curriculum of what teachers are taught in terms, I mean, because I'm not a teacher. I'm looking at it from the outside, but what skill set are teachers being taught, where the brain development of the students are, and how might it be affected when their youth are, one, have a substance use issue, or two, are suffering from PTSD. We're really not dealing with mental health services in the schools at all, because we saw the number of students, we saw the number of how many youth were 5150 co-occurring with substance use.
Yeah. You know, I just wanted to say something about that. Maybe this is more on the political end of it. But all that tax money that people were talking about that's going to come down for education, it's going public health. It's not going to the California Department of Education. And public health really looks at education through a different set of lenses than does a school teacher on this. And so it's going to be necessary for people in public health to do some of the educating, to figure out how do we integrate public health into the schools to reach these schools. Now, a number of the schools do have school-based health clinics, so that already is one delivery system. But right now, there's a huge breakdown here, and most adults don't know what's wrong with marijuana. How many adults really understand this hippocampus thing to understand why it interferes with learning? We're on a very low part of that learning curve, and how do people get educated with it? And it's necessary to do with teachers, it's necessary to do with parents, so that we as an adult community can give the message to kids that it's not okay to smoke weed now. It's really messing with your brain in a way that it won't later on. Right now you're laying a foundation and you're building a house on it. You got this, the foundation has got to be strong. Then we go here. That kind of education, and I mean, some of the techniques that I use now are more accepted, but back then they weren't. Number one, I teach non-judgmentally. And I'll have people say to me, what do? You don't have a judgment as to whether a kid is smoking weed or not? And I'll say, yeah, I have a judgment about it, but I can't teach to that judgment, because part of what we're finding out is that judgment has the kids go like this. So this guy's got an agenda where I am not supposed to smoke weed here. So teaching non-judgmentally, I think, is really important. Another one with teenagers, even more so than adults, is authenticity. Authenticity. And when I go into a classroom, one of the first things that a kid, I say, you know, I'm going to talk about dopamine and brain development, and a kid raises his hand and says, do you ever smoke weed? You know, that's basically a question that says, are we going to have bullshit here? Or are we going to talk business here? So it's necessary to really, you know, and it doesn't mean you have to spill your guts and answer the question. You know, what you could do is say, listen, I'm a teacher, I'm getting paid. If I tell you that, then I might lose my job, so I'd like to keep that. But you have to kind of pass the authenticity test, too, on this. So there's a lot of nuanced stuff. The other one that I think is really important is and this was developed, I think, through Alameda County. Some of the kids at one of the schools, they were making a poster. The poster said, weed can wait. I like that. Can you imagine we said opioids can wait? You know, but weed is a more nuanced drug, and so the whole teaching has got to be more nuanced around it. And there's a lot, and that's why it's difficult for teachers at this point to be able to do that, or even adults. The parents aren't quite sure what to say to the kids at this point.
Do you mind if I
go for it?
May I speak to the PTSD in the pediatric and the child population? So I used to be an educator, and then I went to med school, and I'm a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist. So the challenge with PTSD, it's so complicated. But in the child population, you know, it's not like a combat exposure; it's daily life, and those kind of PTSD disorders might fall under something called complex PTSD. So you're actually arranging a whole personality around a traumatic, lifelong situation where a sense of normal isn't necessarily known. Okay, so I just want to just add a bit of dimension that within that context, I think it's a little hard to explain why you would want to, for example, protect your brain, because life is already so overwhelming. And one thing I've learned about working with people who have substance use disorders, because so many people who come see psychiatrists do, and I don't even specialize in it, is that all drugs, including substances that can be abused, can take on the quality of being like a friend or like a relative. And they can take on a profound amount of importance as something stable in the user's life. And so when we ask people who use chronically to let go of that, I think we need to appreciate that we're asking them to sort of divorce or kill or get rid of an entity that has a semi-human quality. I know that's a weird way to talk, but a semi-human quality. So even if you say, but you could get psychotic. I mean, people with complex PTSD have made all kinds of compromises to stay close to people that are doing terrible things. And so it might not be the weirdest thing to stay close to a substance that's doing something terrible to you, but really makes you feel better in the short run. So it's just a kind of a tricky space to walk, that for people who've been exposed to trauma since birth, what their normal is, they might not even know themselves.
And there is, you probably heard of it, that it's going in the Bay Area now. They're doing this training called Trauma-Informed Schools. Have people heard about that? And it's really informing people about
Well, I
it.
think we're all going to have to get up to speed on trauma.
Yes.
And if anyone wants to learn more about it, a book I really love and recommend is called Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. I think it's just a wonderful, accessible, short-ish introduction to the idea of complex PTSD, different ways that people encounter trauma, PTSD diagnoses, and how to treat them.
And I want to say, as an educator, this is stuff that it creates real barriers to learning.
Oh, I mean, this
You know.
is where you lose maybe not just 6 IQ points, but some people have found almost 20 IQ points. That when we actually are able to intervene with kids at a really young age, I hope I'm not the only one hearing that.
Hearing what? Anybody hear anything?
I didn't hear you.
I didn't hear anything.
You know
Back
what
to
they say about
school.
psychiatrists.
You know what they say about the Twilight Zone?
That it predicted our current political
There
situation.
you go.
But you know, like the more we intervene at these really basic levels around reflective thinking, attachment, connecting, finding a sense of safety, being able to orient into environment, that does lay the foundation for learning and even IQ growth. So it's just that not only does cannabis hit in terms of IQ development neurologically, but there's certain things around attachment and how children are held and contained in their environments that really affects their neurodevelopment.
Yeah, and you know, the place that I really believe that marijuana is really creating inequities in our schools is it seems to affect the more marginalized kids a lot more than it does the kids in the comprehensive high schools. If you look at the statistics on how many kids in continuation schools, the usage is so much higher than it is and one of the things that I'm finding is that a lot of those kids that are in those schools are angry. They're angry, and they're not even sure what they're angry about, but they have good reasons to be angry. The weed takes care of the anger. For sure, that's right.
But then there's a rebound.
And then there's the rebound where you get more angry or more irritable without it. But it's those kinds of barriers that just really prevent, and it's very interesting because at the same time, I'm getting called into a lot of private schools. And one of the things about a private school is it has incredible safety. And I don't mean safety just in terms of being able to leave your backpacks around, but safety in terms of emotionally, I don't feel threatened. I feel I'm able to talk. I think it's probably the biggest reason why people send kids to these private schools is that it then allows for a much easier way of teaching and learning. These kids are more open because those barriers are down. You come into some of these inner city schools and they got this stuff, and they need to have this stuff up there, you know. But that kind of stuff really interferes with learning. Yeah.
So the thought of having, and I'm wondering if this makes sense or if the times have just changed so much that it doesn't quite work. But I'm thinking it's kind of ironic that the model for this might be our societal relationship to alcohol, because we don't have any problem as teachers and parents. I mean, it doesn't always work, but there's no confusion.
Right.
13-year-olds shouldn't be drinking alcohol.
Right.
We don't have any ambivalence.
That's where I want the adult community to
So
be
how
at
do we
with
use
weed.
alcohol and our relationship to alcohol as a, I mean, is it too late? Are the dynamics with our kids and Are the traumas and the pressures just so different now that it's not as simple as just using that model? But I think the point you're making, and you're both making, is so interesting. I did education a long time ago. I don't know what the education programs are like now, but we didn't do a class in psychophysiology of consciousness in education. So I'm thinking, aside from Board of Health and bringing it into the schools and talking to the kids, because the kids don't care about waiting. They're not interested in waiting.
Yep.
That suggestion has no meaning to them. And I'm thinking of, what kind of education is happening at the level of the teacher education.
Yes.
Before they even get to the schools.
That's right, and the adult education around that. There was something else I was going to say around that with teachers. Okay, but go ahead.
I think we're here talking about downstream.
Yes.
We need more upstream, like
Yes.
what causes a little baby once they're born, sweet little thing, to head down this path,
Yeah.
getting all messed up. They're angry because you can't put food on the table because you've got all this crazy stuff happening in your community, and so I think it has to always go together. That you can talk about this downstream stuff, but there has to be really strong. And then, like, you take away weed, give something back, like the cigarettes. You want to chew gum if you can't smoke the cigarette anymore. That you need to stimulate their brain some other way. Then and I don't know if schools have the time or have the mentality to do that. I'm not an educator. I know nothing about the schools, but this like teaching to testing and it just doesn't seem like that's the way our world is constructed.
Our world is constructed to make that prefrontal cortex as smart as we can.
Yeah, that's the point. That exactly that.
And in that process, we're losing a whole lot of what a human being is about there, just going to this. And when I talk to parents about this stuff, and the parent wants to know what's the right thing to say, what's the latest information, and something, like I said, they're trying to put information in here, but really what we're trying to reach is this area.
And Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, in a way it is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I can't go up here if I'm concerned about my safety. Right. And so a lot of the work is in here, in making that connection. And I want to give it props. It deserves, we to come up over here. We got to, what's the feeling? And so I don't want to see parents and kids going to war over this marijuana thing. Where is your connection with the kid? Where is the trust? Where is that? Then we can talk about some of this stuff here. But people are very hung up. If I only had the right information to tell them, that would do it. We were at a meeting with Rich, the guy from Stanford. There was a guy that said, just show the kids the data. It's not that way. This is, we're working with human beings here, and human beings have a lot going on that, go for it.
Yeah, I appreciate everything. It's a very good conversation.
Thank you.
Well, I started off in substance abuse with adolescents in the 80s, working with them in San Francisco. And juvenile justice, kids, things of that nature.
Yeah.
It was jumping into the fire because I was, at that time, I was really just coming into the field. So, I had kids, I had a class with almost as many people in this room. And most of them were kids who sold drugs and got arrested. But so we had to come up with all different kinds of ways to communicate.
Right.
So I finally came up with this stick I had. So I would say to them, kids, I have marijuana. We don't do cocaine. I don't have marijuana. Yeah. I said, okay, let's start here. I said, so you're going to fly to New York, right? You're going to go to New York. You guys want to travel? Okay, let's go to New York. So you're going to catch a plane. You walk out on the runway. There's two guys two pilots, two planes. You look at the one plane. You got a guy in there. He's pumping Snoop Dogg. He's got a beer can on he's got a joint in his mouth. and then you got a guy over here, a co-pilot. He's a nerdy looking guy. He's sitting in there. He's all calm. Let me ask you, what plane you gonna get on? Okay? What plane you gonna? They start laughing. I said, okay, why? Well, I said, you're not gonna get on that plane with the guy bumping Snoop Dogg, drinking a 40-ounce, got a blunt from his hanging out of his mouth, are you? Let's have a conversation, okay? Now, you go out with it, because most of the guys, they were guys. So most of the guys go out, you like to date girls, don't you? Yeah. So, what do you first thing you want to do with the girls there? Oh, you like the alcohol, right? You like the girls that drink the alcohol. Let's talk about that. Why do you like the girls that drink? Why would you prefer a girl who drinks alcohol on the first date, the first couple dates, versus a girl who doesn't? So now we can have a conversation, because all this other stuff, I mean, it's good, and it means a lot. And I think that the other thing, what I was learning is that, I would bring guys in who have been to prison. The guys who tell the war stories, they want to hear the war stories. Oh, how much dope did you sell? No. Most of the guys knew better not to do that. So that was good. We took guys to San Quentin. We had to experiment with all different types of groups rather than just standing there and videos. Kids are a video. This is the video age.
Yeah.
Kids want to, use videos. You got to have discussions with that. So it was really a great experience for me. And I actually published an article on working with kids who sell cocaine, but for my student journal, San Francisco State, after it was based on research I was doing. But I'll tell you, God bless all the people out there working with the young adolescents who are into this thing. But back then they were making thousands of dollars too. But I don't know. But it is a challenging thing. It's exciting, and I think this information is great. And I think it's a way to break it down to these kids. It is real important. I'm glad you're doing it. Sounds like it's a great thing you're doing. I'm really
breaking it down for the kids, we can take some lessons that we learned from the tobacco. We really turn the whole tobacco thing around, and it's and what we in the beginning, what we were saying was we can't tell the kids don't smoke because it's going to cause cancer. Right. It's gonna no. What we got to tell them is, you're not going to be. How do you like to kiss a girl who's been smoking a cigarette? It stays in the smell in your hair. That they'll listen to more than they will the medical stuff. You know what? It turned out we were wrong. The kids were very interested in this causes cancer. They are interested in their own health as well. And to be able to open that up, when I start to teach this stuff with kids, they're fascinated. They want to know, how does this drug work? What is going on here? And to have that kind of approach is way more effective. And you're using a lot of body language with these kids, and all that. One of the ones for me working at school was I was lucky I could play basketball. So during lunchtime we go out and play basketball. That helps to set up. So and it's not this kind of talking. It's more how connecting with our bodies, connecting kinesthetically, and that's you're trying to figure out, how do I reach this kid.
You did basketball too. That was great. Yeah. And how do you build that rapport and that connection? And it definitely has to do with what Tim was saying this morning. You got to listen to him first and find out what are you getting from the drug and all that kind of stuff. But it did turn out with the tobacco that the kids were interested in the health. They were interested in that concern. They weren't just interested in the cosmetics of it.
Right here, Rob.
Yes.
So, it's interesting to hear the conversation because I'm also a psychiatrist, but I also have experience with addiction stuff, so I'm kind of on both sides of that. I teach grown-ups. I'm involved with teaching grown-ups, but not with kids, and I don't work clinically with kids. So, but in listening to the conversation, I think there's a couple things that for me are kind of enhanced by this day today. Part of it is that you're talking about it being more complicated conversation, and clearly it is, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole piece of like, well, but there's medical marijuana too, right? And so the kids are like, well, what's that all about, right?
Yes.
And so is it good? Is it bad? Is it recreational? Is it medical? It's like what is this all about? And now it's going to be legal, and then what does that mean? And if it's legal, it can't be bad, or can it, or, you know, so there's all this stuff going on and all over. So yeah, complicated conversation. The talks this morning were like jam-packed with information, right? So I think the parts for me that kind of resonate the most are that when I went to my very first conference, which was the CSAM conference, and I'm also a member of CSAM like the speakers this morning. In fact, I'm on the board now because I stuck around long enough to be invited on the board after 20 years of paying dues.
Does everybody know what CSAM is?
Yeah, it's a California Society of Addiction Medicine. So it's a group, it's a mixed group of medical specialists. So it's internal medicine, psychiatry, pediatricians, you know, like whatever, pain doctors, whatever. We come together because we want to help people who have addictions. So it's a multi-specialty group of physicians, and at this point now it's also opened to non-physicians. So we're allied health professionals and addiction counselors and stuff like that. We have associate memberships to them. Anyway, so we're a big medical organization. We do conferences once a year, and we do a lot of medical stuff. We have tons of webinars. Tim Cermak was our past president. David is our current president. Anyway, that tells you a little bit about so it's CSAM. We're on the web. Anyway, so when I went to my first CSAM conference, you know, I come from a family where there's addiction. It's generational in my family. And it hit me in the face. It's like, wow, there is science here. And I think that was my first aha moment. And that is why I have kept paying my dues for 20 years at CSAM. Literally, now I have to write the check every year to be a member. And it's because, wow, there is science here. And the science is evolving. Like when I first started at CSAM, they did not think there was cannabis withdrawal syndrome. Nobody thought there was a cannabis withdrawal syndrome. And then, you know, Budney and there are a couple other people found that there was. It's like aha moment. And that's, I think that inviting kids into that, hey, there's science here. That's one of the reasons I love your presentation.
Yeah,
is because
it's non-judgmental.
Because it's like there is science here. Yeah. There's a reason why you know, do what you do, and there's a reason why this, you know, pot or whatever it is has this effect on your body. There's kind of, it's physiological, and there's a reason behind it, and there's science here. And I think that kids have the same reaction. It's like, oh, there's science, right? And because if there's science, then it's not as much dogma, right? And the thing about science is sometimes it gets it wrong. So then when science gets it wrong, you got to stick around until science gets it right, right? Or science doesn't know yet. So my first aha moment is there's science here. Thank God, okay? We need more of it, but there's some. The second thing is that a lot of the stuff, that the research that we've been talking about today, it's on like old school pot. Let's face it, it's on old school pot. Yeah. You know, it's on like, you know, it's on that, you know, the 5 to 10% pot, maybe.
The field is changing so rapidly.
And so the stuff like the resin and the dabbing and like, God knows. And what that's all about on your brain.
And you know something with the dabbing and stuff? I went to high school, cigarettes were what it was about, right? And you'd watch TV and they'd have the dancing Chesterfield things or whatever. Well, today, they have a dance. The kids have a dance. And the dance is called dabbing. And it's this thing. You know when they do that? And all the kids know it. You know it, and they call it dabbing. What it is after you take a hit of a dab, it's like 95% THC, we were talking about it this morning, you cough your brains out. And the dance is people coughing their brains. So it's a way, it's just another way of integrating this thing into adolescent society here. It's just... So, and I want to say something.
So let me say one, I'll make my last point, and then I would like to invite you to teach us more about how all these things, the language and culture of teens, because I don't know that stuff. I mean, this like that dance thing, I had no idea. The last piece I wanted to say is that this whole concept of trauma-informed anything, and your lovely, you know, 3-part brain and all that. There's another piece of it, which is that once someone has been trauma exposed, right, and there's that sense of that safety is not guaranteed, right? They're always prone to going back there really easily.
Right.
Even if they have the safest school in the world and their, you know, their teachers love them and there's hugs every morning or whatever.
That's their
right?
go-to place.
Their go-to place is always going to be that there is danger. They will always be easily triggered to retreat to that place. So I think that people who are trauma exposed have to learn that about themselves. So part of even the conversation we're having here is that kids need to learn that the people who are trauma exposed will be more at risk for going back to that point of fear in relationships, in school, in life in general, right? And that will affect, you know, being invited to try being pot-free, right? Some people might have an easier time of that because their go-to place is not trauma exposed. But the people who are trauma exposed, their go-to place, you're saying you've got to give them something else to replace it, right? So the ask to, hey, just try to be pot-free for a month and see how it feels, because then after a month, your brain is going to wake up.
It's not an easy thing.
It's,
I'll
it's
tell
a
you,
different
you
conversation.
You ask a kid who's been smoking weed to stop for a month.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like asking an alcoholic, I don't want you to drink for a month, but you know what I want you to do? Every day I want you to go to the bar. And spend your day at the bar, because that's what a school is for kids. Kids that go through treatment, get clean, they come back onto a school campus, it's like going back onto a bar. It's very, very difficult. And I want to say a couple of other things.
They can sneak it
Well,
just on campus.
I want to say a couple of other things about it. First of all, I want to give you my definition of addiction. And it was said here, but he said it in a different way. What addiction is to me is this prefrontal cortex that has been figuring out how to get into this nucleus accumbens to get this puppy to fire off dopamine, to get high, okay? And so this has been going on a long time. Now at some point, this part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain says, this is not good. It's hurting me, it's impairing me, I'm not going to be able to pass a UA, I got to stop. This part of the brain says, no, I don't want to stop. This part of the brain says, no, we got to stop now. I don't want to stop. We got to stop. I don't want to. And you end up getting a war inside your brain. And when this guy wins, that's what addiction is. So for me, after 35 years of smoking a cigarette, I'll take a cigarette out of my pocket, light it up, take an inhale and go, man, I got to quit smoking cigarettes. What that is this part of the brain telling this part of the brain, I don't care what the hell you want, so long as I get my cigarette. That, to me, is what addiction is, and that's what can kill your self-esteem and everything else. You're going against your own stuff. And the other thing that you said, the best book I ever read on addiction was a book by the name of Gabor Mate, M-A-T. And the name of the book was In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And what that was about was that image, it's a Buddhist image of somebody that has their mouth open, their stomach is extended because they're starving to death, but their necks are so thin that they can't take any food in. And so in that reward system, they have all those receptor sites, I want it, and at the same time, I don't feel it as much. That's the real suffering of an addict. And what Mate did was he works in Vancouver running an addiction center for people that are just shot to the curb, they're on the streets. He said most of the people that are really hardcore methamphetamine, heroin, crack addicts grew up in a home where they weren't well loved up. And those neural connections that are supposed to get made in the beginning where you get all well, they didn't get made. And so what the drug does is make those connections for them for a while. So much to talk about.
Do you, as educators,
In the realm of hungry ghosts, and the guy's last name is Mate, M-A-T-E, Gabor Mate.
do you work with families in education? information?
Yes, sometimes, like I'll do either a talk at a school or a talk to parents at night, and then I'll have some parents that say, would you do a family session, with us? And I do that. But I say, I'm not a therapist. I really see myself as a teacher, and I get a whiteboard, get the family around, and we talk about how weed affects things, and yeah.
So can you say, for those of us who don't work in schools, can you say a little bit more about what it's like when you say, you're taking the alcoholic and you're putting them back in the bar? Like, so are these jewel things? Are they? How small are they? And
they look like
can you
the
sneak
thing
them?
that you stick into a computer, so it doesn't even look like it's a nicotine delivery system.
Oh.
It actually looks like a USB thing that you put in there.
So it could be totally invisible to anybody.
Yes. Schools are really having trouble now, because now we were able to bust kids for smoking cigarettes, but now, I was reading in the Chronicle the other day, that a kid in a classroom will suck on the jewel and then just blow the smoke into their backpack. Nobody smells anything at all, and they're smoking right in class. And it's the tobacco companies are just lined up for this next set. And we really need to make these separations, and we need to get adults up to speed on this marijuana thing. Because we're really not getting it at this point. There's very low education, and the reason is because all we've had up to now is either a whole group that are going to tell you how good marijuana is, or a whole group that's going to tell you how bad marijuana is. And that's why we don't know anything about marijuana, because it's been such biased teaching up to now. We need to step back. The thing has become legalized now. Let's look at it. And it's not black or white. And I want to say the other thing is that with sex education changed when AIDS came along. All of a sudden, because before it was more nuanced education. Once AIDS came along, it was real clear. We even went to a place called harm reduction, where maybe we can't stop the sex, but we want you to use a condom, okay? It hasn't happened with marijuana yet. It has with tobacco. I can train peer educators to do sex education. I can train peer educators to do tobacco education. At this point, it's very difficult to train peer educators to do marijuana education because it's so much more nuanced. And so the two big things that I want to say is, number one, they're not up in their prefrontal cortex, and number two, this developmental thing of pruning and myelination and stuff getting hardwired at this point. Those kids take that in. They really are ready to do that. But it's got to be done. And I mean, honestly, I don't know a lot of people that have my voice at this point. People are still very split on this whole thing and really have very little understanding. And so it is necessary to go after the adult community and educate them first on this, here, then there.
No, I mean, when you talk about the hippocampus,
Yeah.
I think our culture is like the hippocampus.
How do you mean?
A healthy culture will take information in and will feed it back into the larger system.
Yeah.
And I feel like between the politics,
Yes.
the dogma around whether it's positive or negative, all of that is constraining the system
That's right.
from feeding back into itself all the new information.
Yes.
And it's pushing substances or medicines in some cases into this shadow space where we don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about the effect on our culture. We don't talk about the fact that we're afraid to have the conversation with kids. We don't talk about the fact that they see right through that conversation.
Yes.
There are all those things.
Yeah.
And I think we need a lot more of this.
Oh, yeah,
But
it's
we
very...
need a lot more honesty with kids, with parents, because right now, at this point, the substances are not integrated at all.
Right.
Except for from a capitalistic perspective. Then there's a vertical integration, horizontal integration, and there's the tobacco companies waiting in the wings. So, I think we need to look at, the bigger picture here of how we integrate these substances into our culture, as other cultures have been doing for
many years that we're not. And we need to figure out how to integrate you guys into the schools. because the money is going to go to public health. How do we integrate public health? I mean, so let's say you're good at doing intervention with a group of kids that are using, okay? Well, you need somebody at the school that first sets up a place for you to do this, then has to get the kids out of class to be able to do this. There's all of that integration needs to take place. And so we can bring you in and do your work, but you need a whole support system here that has that set up. And that integration, and we need to integrate, I also want to say, we need to integrate it with law enforcement as well, because with a lot of these kids that we're working with, you need a hammer there to get them to get to the table to be able to do so. It is really necessary for us to integrate a lot of areas. We were able to do that with tobacco, but look how far along we went before we finally got to that place. We're trying to roll this out on the front end. And Tim was one of the people that wrote the stuff here, and he was one of the people that wrote in all this money to go back into education for kids, because we do got to get them on the upstream end rather than the downstream end on this stuff. And the longer we can delay usage, the better off we are. And I want to say something just about me. I don't teach middle school. Because I had parents call me up and say, what the hell did you tell my kid today in class? You told my kid he smokes marijuana, it might make him feel good? I don't want him to know that. You told him he bites into an apple, it's going to taste better? What the hell are you teaching my kid? I just stopped teaching middle school because I want to do that kind of real education, because I know that authenticity and that goes a long way with the kids, and that's the thing that I want to be able to do. And we need, and it doesn't mean if you have a parent that says, I don't want you to smoke weed, it doesn't mean the kid isn't going to smoke, but it will slow them down. Right now, there's not a lot of people that are giving kids the message that it's not okay to smoke.
I need to keep us on time. Why don't we take one more question, and then we're going to take our last break of the day.
Gotcha. Both of these guys, I think we take two quick ones, but over there and then there.
I'm just curious. I raised my son in a school district that had a recovery high school.
Yes.
And when we
They have one in Marie, Recovery High School.
Yes, and it's a model that's
It's great.
yeah. So if there's money,
Yes.
and there's an option, and recovery programs are so very, very effective in many ways, in general, adults and everyone else, kids. And the intersection with mental health, the need for mental health on-site, the need for physical health on-site.
That's why I was talking about those, the health centers that are still in schools.
Right, but the trouble is that when they're embedded in that culture and that milieu, and they don't have an option of saying, I don't associate with that group, I associate with this one. That's what works.
Yeah.
Is when they reach that point where they're saying, I want to recover, where do they go? Do they have to go back to the bar? And if there's an educational option of a recovery high school, then that really opens some doors.
You say.
And if you've got anybody's ears, and there's plenty of research on the internet on this, they're an option, and I think mental health providers would probably appreciate a transitional location as opposed to acute care settings for kids who, between high school and acute care, what's the middle ground?
Well, that relates to what I wanted to say. I'm very much with you. I appreciate the conversation here very much. But I'm a little bit concerned about the emphasis on neuroscience as somehow going to be the answer.
Yeah.
And it comes back to trauma. And that's too big of a topic, really, why there's so much trauma in our culture, because that's really going closer to the source. And just want to say, you were mentioning Gabor Mate, and this may be going a little bit over the deep end from the conversation we're having today, but even he, in terms of his own very neurotic character,
around music,
he said that the thing that really transformed his life as an adult was doing healing with in guided, structured settings with psychedelic substances. and that has come back into the mainstream. Elite universities,
Yes.
Yale, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, they're all doing it now.
Yeah, that's what
And
Bob was talking about.
we still have a lot of that baggage around psychedelic substances.
Yes.
But, you know, people need to know that's being used and seen as a very important healing modality that gets at the trauma.
Yeah. And, you know, this is all, the drugs are so, I have to tell you one interesting one. I spoke with a psychiatrist who was writing out prescriptions for Adderall for students at UC Berkeley that weren't ADD at all. They were using it for studying. And I said to him, how could you do that? You know, what's your thinking around that? And you know what he said? He said, drugs can enhance your life, too. And so it is a matter, this drug thing is not going to go away. It's how do we get a relationship with it that makes some kind of sense? And all of that is very, very nuanced at this point, although we're seeing it explode in our faces with the opioid thing.
Ralph, I want to
Thank
say
you, guys.
thank you.